Thursday meetup of the West Orlando WordPress Meetup group. I'm Rob Watson, a co-organizer and host. West Orlando WordPress is an official WordPress meetup group affiliated with the WordPress Orlando and WordCamp US meetup groups. Every field has its own set of jargon, and WordPress is no different. In this presentation, we will define some of the common jargon and answer some of the common questions posed by those who are new to WordPress. We will start out assuming no knowledge of WordPress at all, but we will continue on to advanced beginner and intermediate questions that tend to arise once you've spent a bit of time working in WordPress. Greene, a longtime West Orlando WordPress co-organizer and host, built her first WordPress site in 2013. It was a personal blog, and all she knew how to do was to choose a theme, change some colors, and start writing. In 2018, she volunteered to rebuild the Florida Tropical Weavers Guild website and quickly realized just how much she did not know about WordPress and websites. Since then, she's been on a mission to improve her skills and now builds and maintains complex sites. So far, she's been completely no code, but has recently begun dipping her toes into CSS and glancing sideways at PHP. At this point, I'd like to invite everyone to mute their microphones for the presentation. Karen, thank you for being our presenter this evening. The time is now yours.
Thank you all for being here. Let me go ahead and share my screen. All right. These are our goals for today. I want to give you a 50,000-foot overview of WordPress, and we're going to start a little bit by talking about how the internet and websites work in general so that you can see how WordPress fits in to the internet as a whole. We're going to describe the components of a WordPress site, of what the interface looks like, and in the process, we'll define terms as we go along. Ultimately, what I'm trying to do is to give you, wherever you are, and most of the people here are beginners, but there's people here who have far more experience and skills than I do. But for those of you who are newer, we're trying to give you a way to know how to frame questions so that you can best find the information that you need in order to continue with whatever project you are on. So we're going to start with some super internet basics. Once upon a time, we lived in a world where everything was physical, paper, clay, whatever it was. For millennia, we worked in that fashion. And along the way, we developed systems for keeping track of information, file folders, binders, pieces of paper, ways to index and reference where things were so that we could find what we needed. When we think of the computers, we call them digital files, and that somehow makes it a little bit more abstract. But the reality is those files are in fact physical. They're just so small we can't see them. They're on chips, and those chips are embedded in devices, and that's what we're using to interact. But the idea that we have information to organize is the same as it was when we had literal paper or whatever that we were using. And so when we came up with systems for how are we going to organize our digital information, those systems were not created completely from scratch. We adapted systems that existed for handling paper. And a lot of times when you look at a user interface, so if you're on your own computer, like you have file folders, and it has a little picture of what is a physical folder. We're still referencing those systems, and you're used to organizing files for yourself, whether they're physical or whether they're your digital ones. You have a system of folders that you tuck things into and they nest in whatever. The internet works the same way. When you have a website, you have two essential things. Doesn't matter what else you're going to do, doesn't matter what tool you're going to use to build on, you need two things. You need a host and you need a URL. A host is the physical space where the files actually live. It's the computer. We call it a server, and you're renting space on somebody's computer, and your website files are actually living there. You have a URL, stands for a Uniform Resource Locator, and we all use these all the time. We type that in to the browser to get to, and here I put the West Orlando WP address for the web page. So that's our URL. The IP address, the Internet Protocol, that is the location of the server. So when you're getting snail mail, you have to have a physical place it's being sent to and an address that is mapped to that physical place. Same concept when we're talking about an intranet. Your physical place is your host, your server, and the IP address is that. The address is your URL, and when you register a URL, there are files that you can put in that map that address to your server. We're not getting into the weeds on how that works. That's just the overview of how it works. So here in this picture, we have on the left, we have a picture of a server location, all these computers, right, in a big air-conditioned room. I've actually never been in a big server room like this. And on the right, we have a woman sitting at her desk and typing on her computer. And so what's happening is when she types in that address, information goes through the internet to where the server is, asks for the files that are comprise that page, and then those get sent back to her browser, and she can view the page that she requested. The files that are being sent from the server to her computer are the content of the page, right? So that's images, text, video, maybe audio files, anything that is the actual information that the website is presenting. And in addition, it's instructions on how those different elements appear on the screen. What order are they in? What color are things? When you press a button, what happens? All of those instructions. The instructions for websites are in different computer languages. There's 5. Some of these are not exactly languages for people who are more advanced. I'm going to call them languages for those who are new at this, because I think we don't want to get into the weeds here on the differences. But we have PHP, MySQL, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript are the 5 languages that are widely used, regardless of what type of a way that a website is built. The foundation is these languages. Sometimes you'll hear people talk about the back end of a website and the front end of a website. And all of the files, regardless of what language they are in, live on the server. But the computer that processes them might be the one on the back end. And when we talk about front end, that means in your browser or on the computer that you're using to access. So that is where those files are processed and the information displays for you. You don't need to know any of these languages to build a website with WordPress. It is helpful, though, to understand what each of them are doing, especially because of the way that WordPress works now. SQL is a database. It's a relational database. There is tables. Every little piece of information that is in a site is somewhere in a table, and those tables are cross-referenced in order to know how things are related to each other and what needs to show up when. There's other kinds of database software, but this is what a lot of hosts use. HTML is like an outline for a page. It's saying this piece of information is a paragraph. This is a heading. This is an image. It's naming what the object is. It's also, when I say an outline, that's somewhat literal. A lot of times you might hear the words semantic HTML. It's sort of like a grammar too. So if you have headings are numbered. There's an H1, an H2, and H3. And you can think of that just like you were writing an outline for a paper. And that they would be indented at different levels, that there is a structure to that. And so it's telling you this is the structure of this page. That's what HTML does. CSS, cascading style sheet, tells you how things look. It tells you what color things are, if they're indented, how big is the font, are the corners rounded on that image? All of those kinds of things, anything that has to do with the appearance, the CSS is doing that. JavaScript is a language of action. What happens when you click on a button? Is something going to pop up at some point? Does information need to be moved back and forth between the front end and the back end? It's PHP does that too, moving information back and forth and referencing what happens when. So these are the languages and an overview of what they do. I told you some things are processed back end, some things are processed in the front end. A lot of times you might hear developers call themselves, I'm a back end developer, I'm a front end developer. And what they're telling you is which of these categories of code that they're working with when they're building something. One of the most common questions that people ask is, how do I make my website faster? And so here we again have the picture with the server on the left, the woman on the right accessing it, and then the arrows back and forth in between. At all three of these points impact the speed that your website runs at. So on the server side, what kind of computers are they using? Like new equipment, old equipment? How many files are on any individual computer, on the computer where your website lives? Because when you have a lot of people use what's called shared hosting. And so many websites, not just yours, are on the same computer. How many total are there? How big are any of those? How big is your website individually? How big are the individual files? So all of that impacts the server side speed. Then in between those arrows back and forth, that's the internet. You know, the wires that are connecting the server to the person who's accessing your site. And that is somewhat outside of your control, right? How far are you sending information? So here, if I have a website that's here in the US, if I'm sending from a file from Florida to Georgia, it's going to be faster than if I'm sending a file from Florida to Washington State. It's going to be, and that'll be faster than if I'm sending a file from here to Australia. So there is like physical difference. Physical distance makes a difference in that speed, but also, and the quality of all of the lines that are in between. And then on the user side, you have how fast is that person's individual internet, right? The in between, we're talking about sort of the long distances, but we do have to think about like the last mile, you know, how it gets right to that person. So we all can buy different levels of speed in internet, and different places, depending on where you live, you have different ability to do that. In addition, it matters what kind of computer you're using and how fast your computer can process information, and what browser are you using and how fast can that browser process information. So I just want to cover that because it's one of the super common questions. All right, so now we're going to start talking about WordPress specifically. WordPress is a free open source content management system. It was released in 2003. It was a fork of an existing blogging platform, and WordPress itself was originally used as a blog platform. We're going to talk about all of these underlined words: free, open source, content management system. We're going to talk about them separately. But when I say it was a fork, what that means is there was an existing pile of code that was already a blogging platform, and the founders of WordPress took that code and used it as the base for building something else on top of it. So that's what we mean when we say fork, and you'll hear that word sometimes in other contexts around WordPress. And it's important to realize that WordPress was originally a blog platform because some of the concepts of WordPress and how it works, and some of the language that people use to talk about it, is left over from when it was primarily and only a blog platform. Although WordPress is no longer only a blog platform. For something around 43% of existing websites are built with WordPress as a framework. And that includes really big sites, including Taylor Swift, the White House, NASA, really, really big sites have WordPress as a base. So whatever you can imagine with WordPress, it's possible to build it. All right, so when I say content management system, what are we talking about? We were talking about all of these files. What a content management system does is two things. It provides a structure on the back end, a consistent file structure and a consistent database structure for how files are saved. So the good thing about that is if you go from one WordPress site to another, that file structure is the same. And here, these first two columns, there I have a picture of what these three files, WP admin, WP content, and WP includes, are the three high-level folders in which everything for your content is saved. The second column is the WP admin expanded. Well, actually, they're all expanded here. So, and you can see each of them has specific folders that are in there. So every single WordPress site is using this same structure, and that helps for consistency especially for people who are building sites as a business to know where things are going to be if they need to troubleshoot or whatever. The other thing, and for most of you, is if you're brand new and you're not like looking at files in the host, you're never going to see that backend piece, but it's there and it's providing that structure. So the other thing you need with a content management system is you need a way to get your files into those folders, right? And what WordPress does, what a content management system does, is provides some sort of user interface for doing that. And in the user interface, you have a way to upload files, to create your content, to design your layout. And so this right-hand column here, where at front end, this is a picture of a screenshot of the menu inside of the dashboard of WordPress. This is the basis of the user interface. And we're going to be going through different pieces of that. So I'm not going to talk about what's on that list, but that's the start of what you're working with when you're actually working in WordPress. Okay, what do we mean by open source? So open source means that the code is available to the public to view, modify, and distribute. If you wanted all of the code for WordPress and you wanted to go and make your own thing built on it, you could 100% do that. It's licensed under what's called a general public license. I have a link in there. And anything that is built on top of WordPress is also supposed to be using a general public license. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about other types of software that you can use to enhance the WordPress. The WordPress Foundation owns all of the trademarks for WordPress and manages the WordPress code updates. So although it is anybody can view and modify and distribute the code for WordPress, there is a process through which code does get reviewed and a plan for how to build new features and implement that. And all of that is managed by the WordPress Foundation. What do I mean by free? So when we talk about free, we're talking about the core WordPress files and all of the functionality that it brings, the core content management system. You might be able to build a website with just those core files. And that's what I did for 5 years, my first blog. Like I used the core files and a free theme and a couple of free plugins, maybe. I don't even remember using that many plugins, but I did it for free with all of the core stuff. However, once you get beyond the core and the more complex your website is, you're going to need additional software. That additional software is not necessarily made by the WordPress Foundation. There's many people who build software that enhances WordPress in some ways, and they are third-party developers. And so and those are not going to be free. some of them will be, but excuse me, but you can't assume that they will be. And in addition, if you need to hire help, if you need somebody to design images for you, or if you need somebody to build your website because the functionality you need is not something you have the skill to build, then you will not necessarily be able to get that for free. You should assume that you won't be able to get that for free. One of the big things that confuses people when they're first looking at WordPress is there's WordPress.org and WordPress.com, and it confuses everybody. The WordPress content management system that we've been talking about was created by Matt Mullenweg and Mike Little. The WordPress Foundation, which owns all the trademarks and takes care of the code of the content management system, was founded by Matt Mullenweg. Matt Mullenweg is also the CEO of Automatic, which is a company that provides a variety of web services, and WordPress.com is one of the services of Automatic. WordPress.org and WordPress.com, in both cases, you're using the WordPress content management system. When you're on .org, though, you're just using the content management system. .org means I'm using that content management system, but everything else related to the website, any hosting, your domain registration, email, any kind of other software that you want to install or tools that you want to use to help build your website, that you're all on your own. WordPress.com provides services in addition to just using the content management system. There are levels at which some of these services are free and others at which you pay. And so you can get website hosting, you can get a domain through WordPress.com. There's a service provider providing the other stuff that you need in order to access to create a website. And you have access to what I'm going to call an opinionated selection of tools. Whenever I use the word opinionated in this context, I'm talking about people making decisions on how certain things should look and function. And so when I say an opinionated selection of tools, this means that I've been using the word plugin, and I am going to define that, and we're going to talk about it a little bit more later. So let's just say a package of software. There's these packages of software that you can add additional features or whatever. You don't have access to as many of those. WordPress.com curates what you can have available to add to your site. All right, so what is a theme? A theme is when Rob was reading my intro and I said, I threw a theme at it and started writing, right? So a theme is a collection of files that control the overall appearance of your website. A theme, it'll provide you with a user interface. Some themes are very opinionated. You know, when I first started, I looked for a theme that had all of the colors that I wanted and the layouts that I wanted, and so that I didn't have to build anything. So it was a very opinionated theme. At the very least, they're providing some sort of interface so that you can set your typography and your colors, and you can choose layouts. They might have templates for you, or they might have pages that are already built out. In general, only one theme can be active on a WordPress site at a time. I'll talk about a little tiny bit of an exception to that in the next slide. So that's what a theme is and what it does at a basic level. You can have a child theme on your site. So with a child theme, you have a primary theme that's installed. So I personally use a theme called Generate Press. And there are ways that you can manipulate those files to make changes that are just for this one website that you're building. But you don't want to make those changes into the theme file that you've downloaded. And you don't want to do that because whenever you update that primary theme, that's something that somebody else wrote. And when they update that and change it, if you've made any changes, yourself, they will be overwritten. So what a child theme does, and on this next screen, this is what it looks like on the back of a website. So Generate Press is here, it's on there, but you see how in the bottom left-hand corner over here of the Greenland Creative theme, it says active. It doesn't say that Generate Press is active. However, it does still have to be installed because this child theme is referencing and incorporating by reference the files from here. And then what the child theme is doing is saying, except in this case, we're going to make this be different than what the original theme, what the primary theme, the underlying theme says. So that's what a child theme is doing. It's allowing you to make modifications without having to write an entire theme from scratch. You're just writing, this is a change from what that other file is telling you, do this instead. All right, so what is a page builder? Page builders are installed in the same way themes are and sort of fit into that same slot. But they tend to provide a lot more than just controls over how things look. A lot of page builders will provide a user interface, which in some cases enhances what the WordPress existing interface is, and in other cases, it might be an entirely different experience. It might bring you to an entirely different screen that is that is basically an overlay that over everything that WordPress is doing. Page builders tend to include functionality that isn't necessarily in a theme. So a theme is not in general going to have a way to create a form, for example. But a page builder might have that built into it. Page builders are opinionated in the sense that they're providing you with a workflow and a way we think that it's going to make it easier for you. They're making decisions about behind the scenes and providing a different way for you to interact. And whether or not any particular page builder is going to work for you might depend on how you're comfortable interacting with that tool. And if it follows the same sort of logic that your personal brain does. But that's what a page builder is. It's a theme plus. So earlier I used the word plugin. A plugin is something that's providing additional functionality to the website. And that's a really super broad definition because what plugins do can be all over the place. They can add additional functionality to core WordPress. They can add additional functionality to your theme. They can add additional functionality to another plugin. They might provide a user interface for things that exist, but that you would otherwise have to write code for so we're going to talk about what a custom post type is. Excuse me, but WordPress has a way to create custom post types, but in order to do it, you have to write it in code. There's no user interface that makes it easy to do that. But there's a number of plugins that will make it easy so that you don't have to write the code. It'll write the code for you. Plugins are a huge part of what it makes it possible to build a WordPress site without writing code. I have a link here to the WordPress plugin repository. There's somewhere in the order of 60,000 plugins. And the plugins that are in the repository are those that are available for free. A lot of plugins have a freemium model, so they'll have a free one and it'll be in the repository and it'll offer a certain set of features. But then if you want to extend the available features, you pay for an add-on to the plugin. This is another thing that comes up a lot. So here on the right is a part of the menu from the dashboard, and you see here it says post, media, pages, comments. Now remember at the beginning I said it matters a little bit that WordPress was a blogging platform first, and using the word post is one of the ways that is reflected. With a post, it's a blog post. It's what I'm typing today. It's what I'm publishing today. It's an article. I'm going to write something else tomorrow. I'm going to write something else next week. And over time, I'm accumulating all of those. But it's somewhat ephemeral. It's something that there's going to be new stuff in the posts. A page, though, is content that's going to be relatively static. If you might have a list of services, your contact form, your about page. These are things that you might do occasional updates, like maybe you add a new service, you got to put something new on that page. But for the most part, it's going to be fairly static. In the background, everything is based on a post. And then, and so pages is a type of a post, a media is a type of a post, comments are a type of a post, but we're calling them different things because they have different functions. And we're storing them in different places in the database. They're stored in separate places. And that's because we don't want our about page to show up on our list of blog posts, right? We need them to be separate in terms of how we're displaying them. And we also are needing a way to keep them organized. So, whoops, my mouse will not, there we go. So this is the different, how to think about what is a post and what is a page. So we can create custom post types. The pages and the media, just like those, we might have content that we need to keep separate for some reason. It's a new category of posts, and you can think of it sort of as a new folder. It's a new set of on a table somewhere. Why might you use a custom post type? Well, sometimes there's information that maybe you have a lot of content, like just using it as an organizational function is one way to use custom post types. Sometimes you want to display one type of content differently than the other. You need a different layout for for a particular type of content. Maybe you have content that you have a blog page on your site, but where do you put things that are not really a blog, not really a post? It's something you don't want to show up on your blog post page, and it's not like a permanent page either. There's kinds of content that live in between. And you might, if you have a lot of content, you might need complex ways to sort, filter, or search your content. So all of these are reasons that you might have a custom post type. Here this is an example. So on the left, this is the menu for the general menu for the dashboard, right? As you see, the post, media, pages, comments, and then it goes on appearance, plugins, users, tools, settings. On the right, this is the Florida Tropical Weavers Guild menu, and you'll see that under pages, I have workshops, mini classes, instructors, vendors, talks, marketplace ads, events, conferences, fiber exhibit entries, conference advertisers, guilds. Every single one of these is a separate custom post type that I created because we present all of this content in different types of ways, and we need to be able to keep it all organized and be able to template it. All right, so the next big concept, what is a taxonomy? My undergraduate degree is in natural science, biology, and I grew up watching birds with my dad. And so when I think of a taxonomy, the first thing I always think about is the way that we categorize organisms. So here we have a picture of a bald eagle, and on the left, we have the taxonomy for the bald eagle. I'm not going to read all of this, but from the domain at the top, kingdom, phylum, as you go down the list, it's getting more and more specific. So the domain is the biggest categorization, but then there's kingdoms. So this is a hierarchical taxonomy here until we get all the way down to the bottom to the species level of what we would call a bald eagle. And I'm not going to try to pronounce that Latin because I have no idea how. This is another example of a taxonomy. This is a screenshot from Wikipedia comparing on the leftmost column the Dewey Decimal System, and in the middle column is the Library of Congress, and on the right is a description of the kind of information that is in there. So when I was a kid, the library I went to use the Dewey Decimal System. I used to know that thing practically by memory. Certainly the categories that I looked at a lot. And so I'm giving this example because when we're trying to classify books, and reading material, all of the kinds of things that libraries keep track of, they're trying to basically have a system for the all of human knowledge, right? How do you do that? And that's what both the Dewey Decimal System and the Library of Congress system are doing, is providing references to those so that you know where to find information. And that is what a taxonomy does. WordPress has two default taxonomies: categories and tags. Taxonomies are only available for posts. They are not available on pages. And you can create your own custom taxonomies, just like you can create custom post types. And if you have created custom post types, you can associate taxonomies with those. So this is one of the big tasks of building a website. Like one of the bottom line goal of a website is that you're presenting information. And all of these tools that we're talking about, the taxonomies and the custom post types, are about organizing that information so that you can present it to whatever story you're trying to tell, whatever you need your website to be doing. You're putting the information into a format to do that. So these are just tools for doing that. So how do you use categories versus tags? This is one of those things that I screwed up when I first started. The easiest way to think of it is categories are separating content and tags are connecting content. So categories, you're using really big groupings. If you are writing a blog, this would be like your pillar content of I cover these 5 topics on my website. Categories are hierarchical. So I put an example here. If you have a recipe site, appetizer, entree, drinks, dessert, like the what course of the meal is it? Tags, you're connecting content. So there's smaller words that might be in multiple different categories, but people still need to be able to find them. Tags are not hierarchical. They're sort of, you can think of them in a cloud or a mind map. On a recipe site, maybe your individual ingredients might be. Now, I gave a couple of examples here, but you can also imagine other examples. It really depends on who you're presenting information to, how you use this, and what you want them to find. Because for example, we're talking about a recipe site here. You could have types of cuisine: Indian, Italian, Chinese, right? That would be another type of taxonomy. And maybe if you were doing a recipe site, you might want to create a custom one and it would apply across various things. It's just thinking about how to break down information. What is the classic editor and what is the block editor? The editor is the part of the WordPress interface where you actually create your individual posts and pages. So here I'm showing the menu where I've clicked on the word post and it pops up a side menu, and one of those is add new post. So the editor is the part of WordPress interface I get to when I click on that add new post section of the menu. This is what the classic editor looks like. The classic editor was the default WordPress editing experience for many years until the block editor launched in 2018. And on the left is a picture of what it looked like. You can see you have in the middle here, you have this big block where you can type. And at the top of it, this says, we're going to type a paragraph. This is bold, italic, these controls here look like a word processor. And that's always how I thought of interacting with WordPress. So it was really easy and intuitive for me when I first started writing, even though I didn't know anything about the internet or anything about code. I had used lots of word processors and this worked the same as those. This whole thing here, this interface, this editor, is called Tiny MCE. Oops, I've actually accidentally clicked the next slide, but it's okay. I was about to anyway. This is what the block editor looks like. And I call the block editor Visual HTML with a CSS user interface. And so at the beginning of this, I told you what HTML is doing is providing an outline and a structure. And what CSS is doing is telling you how something's going to look. So when you are actually building in it, over here on the left, I've opened up the block menu, and you can see I have generate blocks here. This is not a core function. This is a plugin. But here under the text section, these are core blocks that come with WordPress. So you can see they have names that go with them. If a paragraph, a heading, a list, these are all HTML. So if I put that onto my screen, and the two screens on the right, the two screenshots on the right, the one on top is generate blocks and the one on the bottom is the core WordPress, but it's a heading in both cases, an H2 level heading. And the reason that I'm putting them both here is because now if you look over here on the right-hand side, this is what I call the CSS user interface, because this is where I can set the colors. This is where I can set spacing. All of the anything that has to do with the appearance of what I need this headline to look at is over here in this right-hand margin. And you can see that with Generate Press compared to the core, they are presented a little bit differently. With the core block, if I click on some of these, if I were to click on these menus here, these three little dots, it gives me additional options too. They're not available to me on first glance like they are with Generate blocks. But the setting, and I haven't really expanded any of these out, the settings within each of them are going to be different depending on what you are which you're using. So the level of controls that you have access to changes depending on whether you're using core versus other blocks, but it's the same thing. Over here on the right, where essentially is the interface to write CSS without needing to know how to write CSS. And over here on the left, we're writing HTML without having to know how to write HTML. All right, and this is the home page, well, not the home page, but it's the main conference landing page for the at Florida Tropical Weavers Guild Conference. Over here on the left, I've expanded the outline so you can see exactly what's happening here in terms of what blocks I have used in order to build this site. And so each of these, like a container, is going to build a certain type of HTML. I have my outline over here. This is telling me what did you do? What does everything mean over here? I don't have the block level open over here. You're seeing controls for the whole page here, not for individual blocks. But I wanted you to see mostly over here on the left how it's expanded out, and you have an outline of the page to understand a little bit better about what's happening and how you build it. Okay, what is Gutenberg? This confuses a lot of people. The block editor was released in 2018. It was in progress of being built for, I don't know how long before that. And so before it was released, the code name for it was Gutenberg. And so a lot of people use Gutenberg and the block editor interchangeably. However, at this point in time, almost 6 years on from when it was first released, the block editor and Gutenberg are not the same thing. Gutenberg now is a plugin that includes experimental features for the block editor. You can try it's if you want to see what's upcoming, what they plan to do, you can install that on a site. I wouldn't suggest putting that on a site that is something that's live that you want to make sure is functional. Put it on a site that you can experiment on. But a lot of people do use Gutenberg to mean the block editor in general, but at this point in time, it's better to not do that because the block editor is with a stable current release, and Gutenberg is the experimental features. What are patterns? So on the site, when I showed you the back of FTWG, there's a lot of different blocks going on there. And because that page is the landing page for a conference, and some of those pieces of information need to be on other pages too, I can create patterns that are groups of blocks that if I want to use them multiple times on my site. Might be on the same page. Sometimes I'll use the same one on the same block on the same page multiple times. I'll show you an example of that in a minute. Sometimes it might be on different pages. Patterns can be synced or unsynced, which means a synced pattern is one where every time you see it on the website, it's exactly the same content and appearance. And with unsynced, you start with something that's the same, but then you make changes to it, and those changes don't sync across every use of it. WordPress has announced that they will at some point in the future have partially synced patterns. And I believe I just since I created this slide, heard that it's in the Gutenberg plugin now and may be released in the next major release of WordPress, which will be in July. These are two examples of patterns. So synced patterns, exact same design, exact same content. This is from the page I just showed you. So I have this set of 3 buttons. Every single place that this appears on the site, I need those 3 buttons to do exactly the same thing. They're linking to the exact same places, and it needs to be consistent every single time. So this is why I use a sync pattern. If you look over here on the left, this is that same page that I showed you. This right here says 2024 registration buttons. Every single time that this appears down that page, I'm using that pattern of those 3 buttons grouped together all the same. On the right-hand side, I'm showing you an example of something that is an unsynced pattern. So this blue bar with an H2 heading in it as a label for a section of the page. Every time I use that, I want that blue bar, I want it to go across the width of the page. I want it to be the same height, all of those kinds of things. I want it to look the same, but the content's going to change. Because I need a different name for the next section, right? Not everything is called schedule. And so in that case, I use an unsynced pattern. This is a really great example of where a partially synced pattern would be fantastic, because with a partially synced pattern, I could connect it and it would be connected with the design, but not with the content. So the problem with unsynced patterns is, let's say rather than these bars being this teal color, they decide they want these bars, these H2 headings to be like the hot pink. That hot pink is, I would have to then find every single instance that that pattern was used and change it manually. So that would be a good place for a partially synced pattern, so that the color would, if I wanted to change the color, it would change them across all of them, but it wouldn't change like the heading title schedule. What are templates? Templates are, I think of them, the best way to think of them is if you've ever done a mail merge in a word processing, you have a letter that you need to send, and you need to send it to 100 people, and you want it to say, "Dear Mr. and Mrs. last name," but you don't want to have to type that last name, individually 100 times on each letter and save them and blah, 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 blah. So instead, you create a list and then you merge those 2 things together. And that's what a template is on a website. You have your page layout in one place and your content in a separate place, and you merge those 2 things together. Different types of content can use different templates, and there are default templates that are built in. So when you're first starting, you don't necessarily have to think about this at all. WordPress and or your theme include default templates, but you can make your own if you need to. One place where you might need to is if you have a custom post type. So this is an example. This site has 52 instructors on it. On the left is what a single instructor page looks like when you visit the page. And on the right is what that page looks like in the editor. Now you'll see there's no, I have the name of Jennifer Williams, comma Jennifer. And under that, there's nothing. It says type/choose a block. There's no content there. Everything is like in a form. Well, that's because that information in that form is being merged into the template that exists in another place. So I don't have to, it means that there's consistent layout and consistent design, but I don't have to build each page individually and remember how to do the design for each individual thing. What is full site editing? Site editing is a set of new WordPress features that help us build and edit all parts of our website using blocks. There's a site editor, global styles, block themes, patterns, and theme.json. This is specifically about WordPress core and how the future of how WordPress is evolving. there a lot of what they're talking about here is available if in other themes, if you're purchasing or a theme to use. So, but what they're talking about here is the way that core is evolving. The difference between a classic theme and a block theme confused me for a long time. And that part of that is because like GeneratePress, which I'm using, has I use blocks in it, but it's considered a classic theme. And the reason it's considered a classic theme is because they are coded differently. I'm not even going to try to get into the weeds on that because I don't think, because I don't understand it well enough to explain it, but they are coded differently. And they have different user interfaces in terms of where you find things in order to develop your site. This is GeneratePress example of a classic theme. And you see over on the left, I have customize highlighted. And the interface that I get that when I click on customize is on the other picture on the right-hand side. And you can see there's like colors and typography and other kinds of information that I can do there. With a block theme, that no longer appears. I don't have the customizer anymore. It's called an editor. And then over on the right-hand side is what that interface looks like. So the navigation, the styles, the pages, the templates, the patterns are all there in a different kind of an interface. The template parts are a term that's used in full site editing, and they are the header, footer, some post meta sidebar. They're patterns, but they're patterns that are used more generally. They're things that you're going to use across the entire site in all likelihood, and not just on an individual page or here and there. Takeaways. WordPress is infinitely extensible. You can do whatever you need. You need to think about how long will it take? How much will it cost? There's always going to be more than one way to create content. Next steps, I'm going to skip. Well, no, actually, I'll do this part. I'm going to skip a couple of things at the end of this. I have a list of some resources here. You'll obviously be able to see this in the video, and we will also have this on the website. We have a list of resources on the website. The WordPress has a YouTube channel, and they also have Learn WordPress, which has courses that you can work through yourself. And then I have in here in my slides a couple of things that are addressing what plugin or theme should I use, but I'm going to skip those. They will be in the slides that you'll be able to have access to later. But we can take questions.
Thank you, Karen. This is a very informative presentation. I'm sure it'll help a lot of people just getting their feet wet, and it helped me to remember some things too. So thanks for your time.